All right. Let's talk about some of the things I'm going to talk about are going to be short and some are longer, but these are just things that I know are issues from lots of counseling ministry families and being a ministry family. Philippians 1, verse 7 and 8 says, "Even as is meet for me to think this of you all, because I have you in my heart, inasmuch as both in my bonds and in the defense and confirmation of the gospel, you're all partakers of my grace. For God is my record, how greatly I long after you in the bowels of Jesus Christ." One of the things that can be a problem in a ministry home is a lack of being present when you're there. You know, you come home, you've got counseling issues on your mind, you've got, ministry planning and problems and people's burdens that you're carrying, and you come home and you're there, but you're not present, And it's difficult for the family. Not because you're gone, but because you're not really there. You're not with them, Right. And when you're absent from people, you long to be with them. But when you're with people, you're often mentally absent. And so you've got to know that, and you've got to make adjustments there. We live in a day of distractions, and you can literally, it's so common, right, to sit in a room, and here's all these people, and they're all like this, And it's like, and the weird thing is when you see one of them look up and like, they texted each other. You're like, you're just sitting right beside each other, and instead of saying something. That's weird. We live in such a weird day. So you're in the room with them, but you're not with them. Cell phones, the TV, video games, and on and on. Not to mention simply just being preoccupied with problems from the ministry, from life, from whatever. And I don't have a long thing to say about this other than just this is I think a biblical principle in counsel. Learn to be with the people you're with. And that's true even in ministry. Honestly, it's annoying sometimes when you go to a preacher's meeting. And preachers are just so much like, "Hey, brother, how are you? You doing well? Is everything going good for you? Ministry's going? Hey, good to hear from you, man. I got someone I need to talk to right over. Let's just don't even bother. Just go talk to that. Just leave me alone. You didn't want to talk to me anyway. Just leave me alone. I'll sit here alone and, eat worms or whatever. Whatever. But it's like, but we're that way with our families too. And we can be that way in our churches too. With people in our church that we just, we say hi to them, but we're not really there with them. And that's not how ministry really works. And if you're going to minister to people, you got to be present with them. And if you're going to minister to your family, you got to be present with them. You can't just, bless them with the ability to see you, but you're a million miles away, Like, be present with them, okay? And then there are necessities of setting some boundaries in ministry. There are people that are pushy and noisy, that demand attention. And they will try and force themselves into every crevice of your life. And it's not theirs. Your life is yours, not theirs. And by the way, it's not, they don't do this because they love you or they care about you. They do this because they're jerks. That's the biblical, in the Greek. They're jerks. Yep. And there may be many reasons someone will try and invade your personal life. Sometimes it's a control issue. There are people in the church that want to control the pastor and his family. They want control. Sometimes it's a lack of personal awareness. They're just socially weird and awkward, and they just are that's how they are. We've had numerous times, not once, numerous times, with people that have been in churches that I've pastored that have like zero sense of personal space or timing. You know? Like, I'll go to the back door, after I preach, I'll go to the door right there. It's my favorite spot in the church, and there's probably a worn spot right about where my shoulders are, because I like to scratch my back and like that. And we've had multiple times where like one person, every service that they were in the church, immediately runs as soon as they're starting to say amen. They're already there. And they need to talk to me now, about something that they need to say about nothing for the next 30 minutes. And it's like, I had one guy, and they're always like this, and I had one guy, he's like, said, and he just walked up and he just stood there, and I'm like, hey, you doing all right? Yep. Good? You need something? No? Okay then, why don't we step over here? You know, because everyone else is trying to come through, you're shaking people's hands and whatnot. And I had another guy that just, he would do that, and he got in front of me, and he would not let people shake my hand because he needed to talk to me, and it's like trying to shake him, and he'd move over there where they couldn't get to me, and that happened about a couple weeks in a row. I said, look, you go stand over there, and when I'm done, I'll talk to you. But this isn't where I'm going to talk to you. I'm never going to talk to you right here. Amen. If you ever want to talk to me, stay over there, and when no one else is coming through the line, I will talk to you. So he got mad and left the church. And I'm okay with that. And I don't mean that, and I was upset with him, but he was just a demanding, I want your attention person, and I'm here to pastor the whole church, not be his little, you know. And there are just people like that. And you must, at times, set boundaries. I'm not talking about everyone has to know where their boundary is. I'm just saying there are times when people don't understand boundaries, and you do have to explain it in a kind and loving way, but forceful enough that they do understand it. You know, you can be kind and direct. And you need to be at times. And it's not just for you, it's also for your spouse. There are times when, as the pastor, I've had to say to people, my wife is not your personal assistant. And she should not be treated that way. And my kids don't exist for doing all your personal stuff. I'm the one that gets to tell them what to do, not you. Right? They're members of the church. I'm not going to come tell your kids to do my personal stuff either, by the way. You know, there are boundaries there. That church member that constantly calls you all hours of the day and night, they have to know there's a boundary. I have a general rule of 9 to 9. That's my general rule. I take calls from 9 to 9. And I tell my church that. You know, you have a question, you have a need, 9 to 9. And if you want to send me something afterwards, after that, you can text it to me, you can leave me a message. But don't expect me to respond unless it's an actual emergency. If there's a real emergency, you know, but just generally speaking, 9 to 9 is my number. Now, yours may be different. That's mine, all right? There's no Bible verse on that. But I do think 12 hours a day is enough. I mean, it's enough time, you know, for people to get their needs met. It really is. It's more than enough. And they may be the ones who know it's your day off, but they needed to call and tell you something that happened at church on your day off. I don't need to know. Nothing's going to happen about it today, or maybe, probably ever. Right? And I don't need to know on my day off. I don't. On my vacation, they're the ones that send you the email. All the things that they've been concerned about, you know, while you're on vacation. They're just jerks. I'm just being honest. That's what they are. They're jerks. If their boss called them on their vacation, they would be furious. They would be, because they're selfish. Okay? And it's okay for you to understand that. Okay? They're invasive. They won't let you take your mind off of them. Me, look at me. It's about me. You're my pastor, and you have to pay attention to me. And it's like a 2 or 3 year old. Honestly, my 3-year-old granddaughter's that way. She doesn't. It's not like evil. She's just immature. She wants my attention when I'm around her, and I love her, and I want to give her attention. But I'm also grandpa, and I have about that much attention anymore. And I'm like, sweetie, your mom probably looking for you. And her mom's like, thanks a lot. But I expect it from her. She's 3, But there's people that never stop acting that way. And it's not my job to entertain them. Right. It's my job to pastor them and love them. Okay? But it's not my job to be at their beck and call 24/7. There has to be boundaries. And that may be a family member, extended family member. It may be a parent, grandparent. It's not always members of your church, by the way. Right? An uncle that think it's okay to tell you how to run your home all the time. It may be members of the church, but it's pretty much anywhere in life, and everybody experiences it in life. Everyone in life experiences those people, okay? So they don't only join independent Baptist churches, okay? But they feel like it's their place and their right to interject themselves and tell everybody, whatever. And it's okay to say, all right, thanks. Not going to do that, but, good on you. You let me know. And just move on. And don't stress about it. Don't hold on to it. Just move on. Or let them know where the boundary is. Okay? All right. 1 Corinthians 9, new topic. 1 Corinthians 9, verse 22, 23. It says, unto the Jews I am become as a Jew, that I might gain the Jews, and to them that are under the law as under the law, that I might gain them that are under the law, to them that are without law as without law, being not without law to God, but under the law to Christ. That's a part they often leave out.
Yes, that's right.
That I may gain them that are without law. To the weak became I as weak, that I might gain the weak. I'm made all things to all men, that I might by all means save some. And this I do for the gospel's sake, that I might be partaker thereof with you. And let me just throw out, this is not what I'm going to talk about, but let me just throw out, there is not a single thing in that passage, in those verses, that justify throwing out every tradition that we have as a church so that we can be like the world and win the world. That is absolutely not what that's talking about.
That's right. Amen.
We'll talk about traditions on Friday. Personal relationships in ministry become more complicated. I'm not talking about pastoral relationships here. I'm talking about personal family relationships become more complicated. If I'm not careful, I will begin to impose my position as pastor upon my relationships in a way that can damage them and hurt me and them. In my church, I am a pastor. I'm talking about in my church, okay? I am a pastor, a son. My parents are members of our church. A husband, a father, a grandfather, a brother, a brother-in-law, an uncle, a co-pastor, and a boss. All at the same time. I have 10, literally not counting, I have 10 different types of relationships within my church that I have to maintain differently at different times, and you have many in your church. And I can't wear every hat all of the time.
That's right.
There are times I have to be pastor, even with my wife. But it can't be all the time. And I can't always be husband with my wife. in that sense, right? There are times I have to say, I'm going to speak to you as the pastor of Beth Haven Baptist Church, to you as someone who is working as a part-time secretary in Beth Haven Baptist Church. This is not up to husband and wife discussion. I'm your boss right now. It's complicated. It's complicated, but it's true. In that area, I'm her pastor and boss. This isn't husband request. You understand? That's complicated. There are times my kids, as they were growing up, needed dad. And there are times they needed pastor. And I will tell you this, one of the things that spoils a lot of kids is when they have a grandpa pastor who doesn't pastor them ever. He's just always grandpa. And they grow up with a really warped idea of what pastoral leadership is. Because grandpa always let them do whatever they want. And that's how they think pastors are supposed to be that way. I had a situation with a young person, and a good young person. I don't mean this in a derogatory way, but there was a conflict when they came into the church because they had never had a pastor that wasn't their grandparent. And they came in the church and they said, hey, just so you know, I'm doing this. And I said, no, we're not. And they, well, yeah. I'm like, no, we're not going to do that. But my grandpa always let me do it this way. I'm not your grandpa. And your grandpa shouldn't have ever just always let you do it that way. Because, sometimes you needed a pastor, not just a grandpa, And it was a stressful time for him. It really was. Good kid. Good young man. Got through it. Praised God, But there has to be a distinction sometimes between dad and pastor. And pastor needs to be able to deal with. Otherwise, they are going to be deficient spiritually. They are, right? And so I have to be the one to learn how to manage those relationships. And I have to be able to learn when and where and how to be that different relationship for that time. There are times my sons needed me to be dad, and there are times they need pastor. There are times to be husband, and there are times to be pastor. All of those things. A simple relationship in my church, a simple relationship still involves me being pastor, and that's hard enough. Like, all I am is this person's pastor. That's hard enough. And then I add all those other things, right? And you do too, right? So how do I manage those relationships? How can we approach it? This is just what I do. And I think this is what Paul's saying by, I become all things to all men. Okay? This is how I view it, I guess, is like wearing hats. And matter of fact, just for all of the kids growing up, I would always say things like, all right, putting my dad hat on here. I'm not speaking as pastor, I'm speaking as dad, or I'm putting my pastor hat for this conversation. And the issue is it needs to be stated. This is the role. We're having this conversation in this role. Okay? I have missionaries out of our church, and I'm friends with my missionaries on a ministerial level because they're in ministry, but I'm also their pastor. And there are times when that gets blurred for them. And I have to say, hey, I know we're friends, but I'm not talking to you as your friend Rick. I'm speaking to you as your pastor. This is about ministry issues, not about friendship issues. And we have to set those things apart. And we can still be friends if we can make a distinction between those two things. Do you understand what I'm saying there?
Yes, amen.
All right. But it makes it more complicated, doesn't it? It makes it more complicated. So the question that you have to ask to know the distinction there is, what does this issue relate to? In other words, the discussion we're having, does it relate to decisions I'm making as pastor, or does it relate to the decisions I'm making as dad or father or son or whatever? That's the core question. Don't automatically, if you feel like you're losing, resort to, well, this is a pastoral decision. It's not always a pastoral decision, right? There are times this is my decision as a friend, or my decision as a husband, or my decision as a dad, and it's not pastoral in nature, okay? But if it is pastoral, I need to not approach it as if it were just a emotional thing, okay? And so that distinction has to be made. If it's a family issue that includes church issues, then that just gets more and more complicated. But in the middle of conversations, I've had to say, all right, let me speak first as dad. This is how I feel like as dad. And now let me speak as pastor. This is the decision that has to be made as pastor. And sometimes there's a tension between those two things. And I have to decide which gets priority. Right? But I want my kids to know, I want my wife to know that it's not me being a jerk about decision making. It's like, I see both sides of this. As dad, this is how I feel, and as pastor, this is a decision that has to be made. And in this circumstance, this is the one that has to be followed, right? And I know that is a complicated thing. So here's what I did, and this is really what I wanted to get to. I set up some things in our church to help my family have confidence in judgment. In other words, I want my kids to have recourse and my wife to have recourse beyond me capitulating to everyone else about a situation, because I feel like if I defend my family here, it diminishes my pastoral, and if I defend the people, it diminishes my family, and it gets very complicated that way. So I prayed about this. I asked two of our deacons to act as a sounding board, two men in our church, two deacons that I feel are spiritual, number one, and are fair-minded, number two. They're guys that listen and think through problems, and they're both highly accomplished men professionally, and you know, they're reasonable guys. And I asked them that if anyone in my family, my kids, my wife, my parents, my siblings, that I pastor, if any of them have a conflict with someone else in the church, they go to them, not to me. It's not that they can't tell me about it, but I don't make a decision there. I refer to them to these men, and I allow them to make the decision, and I don't intervene. And they judge between the situation. And it removes me from the issue, and it gives them recourse to deal with the issue without feeling like that somehow it's compromised one way or another, because that happens in churches. If I believe that my child is right here, then this church member is going to say, it's just because you're the pastor, that, you know, they're your kid, and vice versa, right? So I just take myself out of it, and it's okay to do that. And by the way, that's happened for us. And decisions were made both directions. And there was a time when one of my kids had a problem with someone else in the church, went to the two men, and they sat down and they discussed things with both individuals. And they said, you know, actually, I think my kid was wrong. They didn't have to come approve that with me. They came and said, Pastor, this is what we think. I said, okay, you're the ones making the decision here. I'm recused from it. You know, judges do that, right? If they're compromised, they recuse themselves. Well, yeah, used to. Valid point. But it's okay to do that as pastor. And Here's the thing, though. If they decide against your child or your family member, don't fight it. Accept it. I don't think they were right. It doesn't matter. What matters is that your child knows that you were still dad. A decision was made by spiritual men, and we're going to accept that decision because they have a position of authority in this circumstance. And that's it. And you teach your kids to obey authority. And it's important that your kids learn to obey authority and not just your authority.
That's right.
We've only ever used that a couple times. It's only been necessary a couple times. But it has been a huge help. And it's been a huge help to my family to know that it's available, even if they didn't use it. Just to know that, it's not just going to be everyone else is always right. There's going to be fair-minded consideration. I've also referred my children out to others for personal counseling. I counsel a lot of people in ministry, and I counsel folks in my church, in our addictions ministry, and then I counsel people in ministry outside of our church. I don't counsel just members of other churches. Okay, but when it comes to marriage issues, if my kids are having marriage issues, I've referred them out. So your kids have marriage issues? Yeah, they don't read my books. Stupid. I don't know what the deal is. Anyway, no, I'm just, they need to be able to go and air the problems and concerns they have with each other. They're already, without feeling like, and especially my children-in-laws, without feeling like, well, you're going to take their side because you're their dad, right? Or my other kid feeling like he's never going to take my side because he's my dad. He's going to bring up something stupid I did from when I was a kid. And so the issue is not whether, and please get this, the issue is not whether I can counsel them. The issue sometimes is whether I should.
That's good.
And so referring them out has been a blessing.
Amen.
And it has helped to protect my relationship with them in ways that needed to be protected that way. And it's not a saying, well, I just can't do it, or I couldn't do it, or whatever. It's just like, it doesn't mean, just because you can do something doesn't mean you should. And when I insist, well, I'm your pastor, and you're supposed to come to me, and I'm not saying they don't, they did come say, we need to talk to somebody. They know I'm going to refer them out. But I'm the pastor, and I'm the one, and they're like, well, you can do that. You're just going to hurt a lot of relationships.
Right.
And my family relationships do matter to me a super bunch. Too much for me to put my pride ahead of their well-being. As if I were the only one that could minister to them. It requires humility to wear different hats. And it requires honesty to evaluate when my relationship, when one relationship trumps another. Okay? And not to impose an authority on a relationship that doesn't belong there. Okay? And so, but it has to be stated, it cannot be assumed. You have to say what relationship, what capacity are we talking in, right? What capacity are we dealing with things in? And it has to be approached that way where both of you are aware of who's speaking to who here, right? And so, but that distinction matters. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this because we talked about expectations yesterday, but expectations are another area in which that it impacts the relationship, generally speaking, because we end up getting we put a lot of expectations on our spouses in particular that should not be there at all, right? And again, I know that, well, my spouse I expect her to clean the house, and I expect her to this, and I expect her to that, and you don't need to expect that. God commanded her to be a keeper at home. That's not an expectation thing, Okay. Now, if she's not a keeper at home, then then you need to sit down and pray and seek God's face about how to deal with it. But it shouldn't be an expectation issue. It's a biblical requirement. Okay. And maybe we need to sit down and discuss and get our alignment on what does it mean. Okay. What does it mean to be a keeper at home? Right. But as much as possible, avoid the imposition of expectations in that fashion. And be a problem resolver instead of a problem magnifier. Anybody can point problems out, right? They're like, you're wrong, and this is in this, and this, and this. Like, okay, but what's your solution? I don't have one. Be better, right? That's not a solution, okay? And so what does it mean? When you sit down and you quantify harm, what is the harm? If I'm just being serious here for just a second, okay? If the harm is, if the dishes aren't done after every meal, what is the harm? Okay? I'll be honest, my wife is way more concerned about a clean house than I am. She's the one that stresses out about it. Especially if I ever have this statement, so-and-so is going to stop by. She thinks they're coming with white gloves and, I'm like, they do know we live here, But it's, whatever. But not every woman's that way. And that's a reality. And there's differences. So, but what's the harm? And if there is no actual harm, then quit being so stressed about it in that sense. Okay, you know what I mean? Like creating tension. There's natural tension. Quit encroaching into stress tensions when there's no need to. And accept that everyone is different. Everyone is different. And not everything is worth a fight. I know that's weird to say. It's not everything is worth it. Doesn't matter as much as you think it matters if dishes are done after every meal or just at the end of the day. Like, you know what I'm saying? So why are you making it such an issue? And I'm saying these are things that happen in marriage counseling. I'm sitting here and I'm like, okay, I understand that's how you want it. There's no problem with wanting it that way. But is it worth fighting over? Is it worth the tension and stress that you put on your home? Is it? Okay. If it is, why? Quantify the actual harm. Quantify the actual harm. Okay. Is it something that you could do? If it's that important to you, is it something you could do? Evidently. All right, so we have to make that distinction. All right, we'll move on since people are upset now. Let's talk about sacrifice. Much better topic. Ephesians 5 verses 1 to 2. It says, "Be therefore followers of God as dear children, and walk in love as Christ also loved us and have given himself for us, an offering and a sacrifice to God for a sweet-smelling savor." Ministry is a place of sacrifice, and there's nothing wrong with teaching our children to sacrifice. Matter of fact, they need to be taught to sacrifice. Part of the problem in America right now is that no one is willing to sacrifice for that which is right or good. Okay. However, the question that impacts a family and ministry is, what does sacrifice mean and what should be sacrificed? Those are important questions. Because obviously every family in the Old Testament that walked with God taught their children not only to sacrifice, but to joy in the sacrifice. Yeah? And so I want to emphasize this, that there should be joy in sacrifice. But we don't think about sacrifice that way much. We think about sacrifice as, miserable, we had to sacrifice, right? That's not how God wants sacrifice to be viewed. And it's not how it's viewed in the Old Testament, and it's not how it was viewed by the disciples in the New Testament. So somewhere between there and here, things got out of kilter. 2 Corinthians 9:7 says, every man, according as he purposed in his own heart, so let him give, not grudgingly, nor of necessity, for God loveth a cheerful giver. And there are things that we give in ministry as a family and individually. God wants us to give in joy. So let's just consider 4 thoughts about sacrifice with that concept in mind, all right? Number 1, and thinking about Old Testament here for a second, okay? When they made a sacrifice, they didn't kill everything they owned. Is that fair? We're going to make a sacrifice to God, kill all the sheep. You know, that's not how it was. I certainly believe everything belongs to God. And I know God has given us everything that we have. Everything is His. It all belongs to Him. And our children should be taught that. No doubt. But your children should be taught also that to sacrifice is not intended to bring an undue burden upon the family. Kids, sorry, we're going to make a sacrifice to God, so we're not going to be able to eat anymore. Right? That would not be a biblical sacrifice in that sense. They didn't kill all the animals, all right? That would hinder their heart. Okay, let me say it like this. You should always be careful not to make sacrifice to God seem like a punishment to your family. They ought to be taught to sacrifice. They ought to rejoice in sacrifice and joy in it, but it should never feel like we're being punished because we serve God. Number 2, a sacrifice was not the only thing they ever did all day long, all of their life. Right? They lived a life that included sacrifice, but they still lived a life. 1 Peter 3:7 says, likewise, ye husbands, dwell with them according to knowledge, giving honor unto the wife as the weaker vessel. And I like this statement, as being heirs together of the grace of life. That is not talking about salvation. It's not. It's talking about life. You know, really what it boils down to is this. God wants you to enjoy being together in this life. You get this one. My wife hates this when I talk about this, but she's not in here right now, so this is okay. Jesus said, they that are in heaven are like the angels, which neither marry nor are given in marriage. My wife and I, we have this life. This is it. This is the one we get. I'm not going to be her husband in eternity, future. I hope, my big goal is that by the time we get there, she still likes me. All right? But 6s right now, you know. But here's the thing. I want to get to the end of this thing, and I really want her to feel like it was good. It's what we get. And I want her to feel like I would do that again. And that doesn't mean we didn't make sacrifices. But it does mean that we did spend time. It wasn't the only thing we did, right? We had joy together. We enjoyed our life. And you've got to stop thinking that if you don't spend 24/7, every waking moment, sacrificing for the ministry, that somehow you're doing it wrong. That's not how it is. It's okay to just enjoy your life with your wife and your family. Everyone in the entire Bible that made sacrifices also did that. Think about what Deuteronomy says. How do you train your kids? Well, when you're sitting in the house and when you're lying down, when you're walking by the way, when you're doing this, and you're teaching them as you're going along. There's that time spent, there's that joy spent in training, and it's not just all discipline, right? Training isn't just, I'm going to beat you into submission until you understand the authority that I have over you. That's how you're going to drive them away.
Right.
You're going to drive your kids away from the ministry. Do nothing but sacrifice everything, and no joy and no peace and no happiness and no liking to live. That'll drive your family away from God. It will. It's not the only thing they did. Number 3, the family sacrifice. Now this is important. The family sacrifice was a cost for the father, not the children. The children didn't bear the weight of the sacrifice. He made that sacrifice, but it wasn't like, kids, we're taking all your piggy bank money away now so we can make a sacrifice to God kind of thing, right? And that's why, by the way, I really do think this, and maybe this is why after years of this, but I do almost all the study I do, intense study I do when my kids were still asleep. Get up and I study while they're sleeping, I don't study at night on purpose because I want my wife to have some designated time, and my wife doesn't like to get up early in the morning, right? And so I make a sacrifice of spending my time early in the morning with the Lord, so that I can spend time with my wife and kids and not take away that time from them, and let them enjoy sleeping in. I can't do that. Now, at this point, I can't do it because my body doesn't let me now, right? But there was just a time when it was like, it was a sacrifice to get up, but that's okay. It was a sacrifice for the Lord, and I was making for the ministry, for the work of God, but I wasn't taking it from my family. I wasn't saying, listen, guys, we can't enjoy Saturday afternoon because Dad has to spend all day studying for Sunday. I want to enjoy some life with my kids, right? You only get them for a few years, and it goes so fast after they're 4. First 3 years are miserably long. Miserably long. Like, this is never going to end. And then all of a sudden they hit that age, like, boom, they're teenagers, and then they're married. And it's like, what happened, So, number 4, the sacrifice did not take away from their basic needs as a child. God will never ask your children to sacrifice having a dad or your wife to sacrifice having a husband. I said that earlier. And I'm speaking of in a voluntary manner, not in a matter of death. You know what I'm saying? I'm speaking about you're still there. You haven't died. God requires you to be a good husband and a good dad. Right? And so it's not your kids that are supposed to sacrifice having a dad. It's not your wife. We're doing this for the Lord. No, you're doing it because you don't want to make sacrifices elsewhere. You still want your own time. And or you want fame and prestige and notoriety. Right? In the end, if your grandchildren, if your great-grandchildren even know who you were, if your great-grandchildren even know who you were, you're in a minority. And, we talk about people of the past, and, there's been a whole lot of people that lived for the few that we actually talk about. And the likelihood of me being one of those is really, really small. There's more people now than there ever were. But my wife, she deserves to have a husband. I married her, made a commitment to her, made a vow. She deserves to have a husband. My kids, and we chose to have them, they deserve to have a dad. It really doesn't matter after that if anybody else remembers me or knows anything about me. That church that you pour your life into, please don't take this wrong, but within a couple years after you retire, they won't remember you at all. They just won't. Every person, and this is going to sound horrible, it does sound horrible, but every person in your church is just one decision they don't like away from leaving. And yet we abandon people that truly do love us to try and please people that literally would leave if you changed the toilet paper to something they didn't like. And I'm not saying we shouldn't sacrifice for the work of God. I'm not saying that we shouldn't love people and care about people and serve. And we should. But not at the expense of your wife and kids. And a lot of ministry problems would be solved if you'd learn where sacrifice belongs and who actually is to make the sacrifice, who it's supposed to cost. And stop making your kids pay the price and your wife pay the price. Amen. All right, well, let's take a break now. We'll start in 10 minutes.